What's going on, everyone? My name is Rev, and welcome to my Guilty Gear Strive beginner guide. This guide is going to cover all of the basics as well as a handful of advanced concepts that will have you well on your way to mastering Strive. This video is going to be a long one, so I've divided it up into chapters for your convenience. If you're looking for something specific, you can locate the timestamps in the description down below. Without further ado, let's play some Strive. So we're going to kick off this guide with a very large quality of life improvement. Go ahead and pick your character, whoever you want to play. Hit start and go into button settings. You'll be able to remap all of your buttons if you're so inclined, but the big one to take away here is rebinding the dash button to be something that's comfy for you. Personally, I have it on RB, and if you're playing on pad or like another controller, you can also bind roam and cancel. Hitting buttons on the stick is relatively easy, so I personally don't use it. It's just kind of bound to whatever it is. And then I also bound the play and record button. You can set those to whatever you want, but just know that binding dash is very useful, and binding roam and cancel is also very useful. You can also bind burst, but I personally don't do that. It's pretty easy to press buttons on stick. Again, playing on stick, everyone has their own preferences, but you can do this. So now that we've bound our buttons to what we want them to be, and we've gotten a little bit more comfy, we can go ahead and talk about some of the movement here in Guilty Gear Strive. It is an anime game, meaning that the vertical and horizontal movement in the air is typically a little bit more versatile, say in a game that is also 2D like Street Fighter, but the 2D concepts are still relatively the same. You can hold forward to move forward, you can hold back to move back. If you want to crouch block, you can hold down back. If you want to jump, you can hold up, jump forward, jump back, up back. You get the idea. You can also double jump and super jump. You can hear the sound difference. You can super jump forward, super jump back, etc. And finally, if you utilize your newly bound run button, wink wink nudge nudge, or double tap forward, you'll perform a dash forward, and your mileage may vary based on who you pick. Everybody has a different way of moving forward when they dash. And then additionally, you also have a back dash, which can be done by double tapping back or pressing the run key and back at the same time. And that just about does it for your movement options. With movement out of the way, we can go ahead and talk about the combat basics here on Guilty Gear Strive. There are 5 different buttons that you can utilize to attack your opponent. We have punch, we have kick, we have slash, heavy slash, and a button called dust. So punch is typically your shorter range, faster button. You can do it crouched as well. All of these buttons can be utilized crouching or in the air. They all do different things and have different ranges, but for the most part, punch and kick are your faster, shorter range buttons. You have slash, which is a longer range move, but a little bit, it's still relatively fast. And then we have heavy slash, which is even longer range, but a little slower, and you'll get varying levels of damage based on how fast or how slow the attacks are. So the dust button is kind of interesting in that it has a lot of different purposes for different situations. You can see that when Kai presses dust in the air, it does kind of like an electric blast. However, if I swap over to Soul, he just kind of jabs with his sword. Everybody's aerial dust is going to be different, and so just experiment it with it in like air combos and stuff like that. Some are more useful than others, but for the most part, it's just an aerial attack that you can utilize in a different way. Now, additionally, if you move forward and hit your opponent with a crouching dust, you'll get a hard knockdown. This is what's known as a universal sweep button. Every character is going to be able to do this. If you approach your opponent very closely and hold a left or right, you will be able to throw your opponent utilizing the dust button. It is worth noting that you can also throw your opponent in the air. You can see that Kai is whiffing. And now probably the most interesting portion of the dust button, which is just the standing variant. If I press the dust button, you notice that it has an orange flash to kind of indicate that it's coming. Now, why does it need this indicator? And that is because, despite what it looks like, it has the ability to overhead your opponent. Soul is currently set to only crouch block, but if I use the dust button, you can see that I'm actually able to get some damage in. Even if I press slash or heavy slash, you know, these pretty much look the same. But because it's the dust button, it's hitting him overhead, which is pretty much the same as if I were to jump and attack him. There are different block states, which I'll go ahead and cover later once we start talking about defense, but the dust button is a way to beat crouch blocking. Additionally, dust can be charged to like a level 2 version, which will send them reeling into the air. It sent Soul pretty far away, and there's actually a reason for this. If you hold up, or up forward, or I don't even know if you can hold up back. You can. You'll send them into the air, you'll get a fancy combo as well as a screen transition. This is a great way to get damage, and you'll also get something called a positive bonus, which I'll talk about later in the guide as well. That's just kind of what the buttons do, but if you go into the command list, you can see that there's something called the command normals, which we'll go ahead and talk about. I encourage you to use this command list. It is very useful to learn more about your character if this is your first time playing. But we're going to go ahead and talk about command normals, and I'll just demonstrate them in real time. If you look at Kai's punch, it is more of kind of just like a chop. But if you use forward punch, it's more of an elbow. This is what's called a universal anti-air. So every character's forward punch is going to have something called upper body invulnerability, meaning that the hurt box of your character is partially missing. So attacks that are coming from the air are more likely not to hit you. So this is a good option if, say, there's a high hitting move, or also if your opponent is just trying to score a hit on you from the air. You can see that it says punish when Soul misses and I'm able to hit them with the forward punch. I just want to hammer home the idea of command normals having something different, like a different property to them. Like for forward kick, it says it gives advantage when blocked, making it a good option at close range. So I can use this to kind of step forward and I'll have advantage if they block it. I can also combo it into something else if I wanted to. Check out this command list because it's going to let you know what these command normals do. So be sure to check this out. So as you can see, there is quite a bit that you can do with just 5 buttons here in this game, but honestly, we're just getting started. There's something in this game called proximity normals, and this is typically bound to the slash button, where if you press slash from afar away, distance, you'll perform one move, but if you run up very close to your opponent and press the slash button, you'll go ahead and perform a different move. These moves do link together for a true combo, and you can also do the same with heavy slash. You can do close slash into heavy slash for a true combo. So we have this idea of like a combo hierarchy where 2 moves easily can go into each other. In this example, it was close slash into far slash. There are more of these, and this was formerly a mechanic called Gatlings in previous Guilty Gear games, and they've kind of toned it down a little bit with Gatlings. Gatling used to be like 1, 2, 3, 4 special move sort of thing, but in this case, Guilty Gear Strive has punches into other punches. It has kicks into dust, and then it also has things like slash into heavy slash. Now this extends even further where punches can go into command punch, and then the command punch can go into a special move, so you can get a combo that looks like this. And this is going to vary from character to character. This is kind of what makes all the different characters unique in their own special way. Some characters are not going to have like the command kick that Kai has. Maybe they'll have like a command slash or a command heavy slash. Everyone's going to have the forward punch, but everybody else's additional buttons are going to be different. And so your combo routes are going to be different. And honestly, that's just good in a fighting game, right? Variety is good. To add even more variety to all of this, we also have special moves. In Kai's case, you know, he has the pretty standard fireball, uppercut, the flying kick sort of move. Everybody's special moves are going to be listed in the command list. So if you're playing someone else other than Kai, be sure that you visit this to figure out, you know, how everybody's moves are done. And maybe you're just experimenting with characters. This command list is going to come in real handy. So we talked about the offensive capabilities in Guilty Gear Strive. We can go ahead and talk about the defensive ones. And this is a back-to-block game, meaning all you need to do to block, there is no button for it. All you need to do is hold back. You can also crouch block by holding down back. 2 of the 3 states that you're able to block in. So if I just have Soul throw out some projectiles, you can see Kai's defending no problem. However, the crouch block blocks against your lows and your mids. Your stand block will block against your mids and your jump in attacks or overheads, as I demonstrated with the dust attacks. And then additionally, you are also able to block while in the air. The concept of like highs and lows doesn't really apply while you're in the air, but it is worth noting that you can't immediately jump block after you wake up. So if you plan on getting knocked down and then just immediately jumping into the air to block everything, that doesn't work. It does have a little bit of a startup. There's also another niche type of blocking called instant block or just guard. It has a multitude of different names, but the gist is if I attack Soul, there's a brief amount of knockback, and some moves like Dire Clot is a unsafe move, but it knocks them back insanely far. It also deals chip damage. You'll notice that Soul's health has gone down. But under the effects of an instant block, which is done by properly timing the back portion of your block, so if you just kind of tap block at the moment that the move hits, you'll perform a just guard. You can see just on the right hand side. It will absorb that knockback and absorb the chip. And in this particular situation, Soul would be able to punish me because I'm using an unsafe move. And the only reason that it is safe is because of all that knockback. And so if your opponent is getting predictable, you can do a just guard and then punish them for it. This is kind of like a mental stack thing. This is something a little bit more advanced. That is an option that will come into play as you get better at the game. But just knowing that it exists is very important. So instant blocking can be a little bit tricky, right? You need to time the cadence of your block with the opponent's attacks. It's highly likely that you'll probably mess up if you're trying to block like an entire combo that way or a bunch of projectiles that way. So there is a more reliable way called Faultless Defense to do this at the cost of some tension, which is that bar down there at the very bottom. You can notice on the left side that it's steadily draining as I hold up this green shield. That is called Faultless Defense. It is simply done by holding back or down back or back in the air while holding 2 attack buttons. This negates chip as well as any other attacks dealt. You'll kind of like push your opponent back even farther, or maybe you'll go sliding back even farther. It's to keep your opponent out. It keeps the pressure down, and it's a good just kind of like brief moment of time to think, right? You can think, okay, we're pretty far out. Maybe I'll try something else, and it might work out. And also, it avoids that chip damage where if a giant super, like say Kai's Sacred Edge, which is a super move, that move would normally deal maybe like a fourth of his life. But in this case, Faultless Defense makes it so he just gets knocked back a little bit and takes no chip damage. As a little bit of an advanced tactic, if you hold down the button, you're going to drain your meter pretty steadily. And what you want to do is time them with the cadence of your opponent's attacks. You can ration your meter a lot better this way, and that way you can save it for other things like Roman cancels or super moves, which is something that we'll go over here in just a moment. The last offensive option that we can talk about is something called the burst. If you look underneath your HP bar, there's a blue bar that says burst on it, and you can perform a burst by just using the dust and any attack button. So dust and any attack, and you'll perform this little explosion around your character. Now, what does the burst do? If I attack Soul with a small combo, he kind of said, get off of me, I'm gonna use my burst, and it's a combo breaker. It's a way to push an opponent off of you and not have to deal with some of the damage that, you know, if you were about to deal a full combo, right? Like if I wanted to deal the full amount of damage, this is how much it would cost. Now, you can also notice that the burst comes back relatively slowly. Like it's gonna take a while for it to come back. It is on just like a timer. And the more stuff that's happening, you know, if you take more damage, it will come back. But roughly, it's pretty safe to say that you might be able to get only 2 bursts in a set. Now, there are 2 different types of bursts. There's the blue burst, which is the one that Soul is utilizing, right? You can see the blue explosion whenever I put him into a combo. And then there's the gold burst, which is something that you can utilize to sacrifice your defensive option for more offensive resources. You can see that my tension meter at the bottom is empty, and without hit stun, if I use my burst, there's a gold flash, and it maxes out my tension gauge. I can now use more of my resources for combos and specials, etc. In the grand scheme of things, gold bursting is something where your mileage is going to vary, right? In worst case, you're gonna just pop your burst somewhere randomly and not be able to hit the opponent, and then you get no resources and you're without a burst. At the very best, you know, maybe you catch your opponent slipping and you have full offensive resources and you make a sweet comeback. So it's a mechanic that exists, but it's also something that you need to use with caution. Your burst is not something that you should be blowing at any, you know, random moment in time. It needs to be calculated. It needs to be well thought out. Probably the most important thing to know about the burst is that it is not an unblockable attack. If I run up to Soul and I use some pretty heavy buttons that have a lot of delay in between them, I will probably get bursted and I won't be able to block. However, if I run up and punch him a couple times, these are faster buttons, I'll be able to block the burst and then punish accordingly. And it's not just a little bit of extra damage, as you can see. It can result in some deadly interactions, so burst baiting is also a thing. The burst needs to be a calculated response. I've mentioned in previous videos that Guilty Gear is an aggressive fighting game, and the reason for this is partially due to the tension meter. The tension meter can be substituted as something like a special meter or EX meter, however you want to visualize it. It's how you do special moves, it's how you do fun things like Roman cancels. And so we'll go ahead and use a special move called Dragon Install. And you'll notice that 50% of my tension is gone. And the tension meter does work in 50% and 100%. So you can think of it as just kind of like 2 pips of the bar. And so if I wanted to, say, use a super and then Roman cancel, now I'm completely empty. So you might be wondering, how do you get more tension? And tension is gained through pretty much any aggressive action, even something as simple as running towards your opponent. This is actually a great way to gain tension. If you hit them with some combos, you'll gain some tension. If you get hit, you'll gain some tension. And then there's that other quick way to kind of max out your resources, which is that gold burst. So you can get maximum resources and then you can do cool special moves like Ride the Lightning. Now we're just scratching the surface. If you just caught the tail end of that, you might have saw the positive bonus when I sent Soul through the wall. Got something called a positive bonus. Notice how I'm not doing anything while I have the positive bonus, and my tension meter is just going straight up. It's skyrocketing, honestly. So if I do start moving, I'm going to get tension very, very quickly. So the game really does reward you for being aggressive. However, there is a converse to this. There's something called a negative penalty. If I just keep backdashing and playing quote-unquote defensively, you can see that the bar is going a little bit crazy. Danger shows up on the screen. The bars flash and rev. And I get something called a negative penalty. It takes away all of my meter. And now I have to rebuild it from scratch. This happens even if you're just standing still, like Soul is. Now, negative penalty doesn't do anything other than steal your tension, so there's no, like, I'm gonna take additional damage or anything, but losing all your meter is a huge detriment. So tension is used for special moves, it's used for Roman cancels, there's positive and negative bonuses, there's ways to lose all your tension as well. But you know, one thing that we haven't talked about too much is Roman cancels in general. So I think that that's the next step that we're going to be talking about. What are Roman cancels? Roman cancels are performed by pressing any 3 attack buttons other than the dust button. Because if you press some attack buttons and the dust button, you're going to get a burst. But if we press like punch, kick, and slash, we get something called a Roman cancel, which is like a time stop mechanic. I can demonstrate it here. So Soul is going to do a bandit revolver. But if I predict, you can see how much slower it is. So I'm going to do this again, but I'm actually going to attack this time. So normally I wouldn't be able to punish this, but if I use my Roman cancel, you can see I get the punish and a combo. This is just one of the many practicalities of Roman cancel. And also just this mechanic gives a crazy amount of depth to the game, and it also adds a ton of fun. And so there are 4 different types of Roman cancels. There is blue, yellow, red, and purple. They're all indicated by different colors, and every color does something different. There's gonna be a guide to Roman canceling in the future, but we're just gonna quickly go over what every single one of them does. Probably the most common Roman cancel you'll see is something called a red Roman cancel, which is done by hitting your opponent and then immediately hitting your Roman cancel button. I'll go ahead and demonstrate. You get a red flash and it pops them up into the air. And so this extends your combos beyond their normal capabilities. Another common one that you'll see is something called a purple Roman cancel. A purple Roman cancel has a variety of different uses. It's great for mounting offensive pressure, and it's also great for making yourself safe after taking a large risk. So let's use the example of Kai's charged fireball. This move has a ton of startup, and I can't really do anything. Like, this is as fast as I can kind of get into the action after following it in. However, with the help of a purple Roman cancel, I can follow it in and mount my offensive pressure in that way. So it kind of animation cancels my fireball so I can follow it in. Now, it is worth noting that if I do press it too early, or if I just kind of like use the fireball and then purple Roman cancel immediately, the projectile won't come out. Now, on the contrary, let's say I'm using a move like crouching heavy slash. Pretty slow, a lot of vertical reach, might be good for an anti-air, right? So, but I know that this move is pretty unsafe. So if I want to try to anti-air, but I'm not sure if my opponent's going to do it, they might hit me with something like that gut punch. I might fish for it and then purple Roman cancel out and then just block. So here's the example. Right, it covers my base, you know, they didn't jump at me like I thought they might, and then I was able to recover and block the gut punch. So here's a common occurrence versus Soul. What if the gut punches just keep coming? And you're just like, man, I don't know what to do here. I have this meter, but you know, I don't know what to do. With the help of yellow Roman cancel, which is performed by pressing 3 attack buttons while in block stun, you can push your opponent off of you and perhaps mount a counter attack. It will at least buy you a little bit of time. So last but definitely not least is something called a blue Roman cancel, which is done by just performing a Roman cancel while nothing is going on, while in neutral. Looks something like this, and it might not look like something is happening, but once you get closer to your opponent, you'll actually see what it does. A blue Roman cancel will add a little clock behind your opponent, which indicates that they are slowing down. The blue Roman cancel allows for things that normally aren't possible to actually happen. So in this example, we'll go close slash, far slash, heavy slash. And then we'll try it under the effects again with a blue Roman cancel. You can see that it combos cleanly and keeps the opponent relatively near. Another great use of the blue Roman cancel is reacting to your opponent's offense. Say they're doing a jump and want to get out or try to hit you while in the air, but realistically you're just going under. Normally you wouldn't really be able to do anything. But with the blue Roman cancel's help, you'll be able to slow them down while they're in the air and catch up to them. These are just some of the ways that Roman canceling is useful and beneficial. This is where a lot of the depth of the game really comes from, and this mechanic is very, very complex. And so there's going to be a separate guide for Roman cancels in the future. Be on the lookout for that. And let's go ahead and move on to something a little bit easier to comprehend, something called the RISC meter or RISC gauge. Now, to further add to the aggressiveness of Guilty Gear Strive, there's something underneath the burst meter. It's a very tiny meter. It might be hard to see, but it's a little pink meter that goes up as you block attacks. Now, what does this little pink meter do? For this, we need to turn on the damage numbers, and I need to go over a few examples. So I'm going to start with a basic combo that's just a 95 damage combo. The combo damage was 95, max combo damage would be 95. And so let's go ahead and build up a little bit of RISC. And we'll go ahead and utilize the same combo. You can see that that one hit for 108. So what was happening there and what's going on with the RISC gauge? When you perform a combo like this 4-hit combo, There is a certain amount of damage scaling based on the number of hits that you perform. So if your combo is 4, you know, it might be scaled a small amount, but if you do like a 9-hit combo, it might be scaled a lot more. When you're under the effects of RISC, the damage scaling doesn't exist. And so it allows for you to get way more damage for being aggressive. If you are aggressive towards your opponent and you're building up their RISC, that's a lot of things to think about, right? There are a ton of options in this game to get your opponent off of you via Roman cancel, burst, what have you, just guarding and punishing, etc. And so you're also getting rewarded for making your opponent block. So the RISC is pretty straightforward. You block, and if you block for too long, you're going to take extra damage from these combos, you know, less damage scaling. But there is one final thing to know about the RISC meter. When it is capped out, it turns red and there's a little caution sign at the end of it. This means that there's going to be something called a counter hit, and which is what we'll talk about next. And you're going to get the highest level of counter hit off of any attack that lands, which means you're going to get even more damage. So you get severely punished for having your RISC maxed out. Let's go ahead and demonstrate. We'll just do a light punch. You get counter across the screen, and the screen just kind of freaks out, and you know, you get to keep doing your combo with that additional damage scaling. So we talked about the RISC meter and counter hits now, so let's just get right into counter hits. So implemented in every fighting game to recent memory is something called a counter hit, which means essentially that you're just hitting your opponent when they're about to hit you. You can see that counter comes up on the screen. And so if I'm normally just utilizing this kick, you can see that the last one did 32, that one did 29. We'll go ahead and demonstrate again. On the counter hit, you just get a little bit more damage. Okay, cool. Now, what happens if you utilize a stronger attack, like a slash, to counter hit? You can see that you get counter across the screen, and the announcer says counter. Now let's try it again with the heavy slash version. You get counter across the screen, the announcer goes crazy, Soul is all the way far away from me. So you get all that damage, and you get a ton of time to do pretty much whatever you want when you see that big counter across the screen. So let's try it again. That's just an example, probably not very optimal, but still, you get the idea. You can follow up, you get more time to react, and you get more damage based on the level of counter hit that you are getting. In the same vein of counter hits, it is possible to do something called a clash, which I'll go ahead and demonstrate. So we'll just have Soul, you know, just do a bunch of punches. But what if I do a bunch of punches at the same time? If I do a bunch of punches at the same time, we perform something called a clash, meaning that nothing's really going to happen, but we press the same buttons at the same frame of activation. So it's just kind of like a cool thing that can happen. So it's like, oh, you guys had the same idea, and it's demonstrating that. Doesn't come into play too often, but it's cool to see. Still very true to fighting games in general is the desire to not really want to be in the corner. Guilty Gear is still the same, and you can tell that with all the mobility, I have all these moves that will propel me forward. I can pretty much be anywhere on the screen. Meanwhile, Soul doesn't really have anywhere to go. And there's also an added problem on Soul's side, which is something called the wall. The wall is a new mechanic added to Guilty Gear. It has a slew of mechanics to it, and so we'll go ahead and tackle them one by one. First thing is you can bounce off of the wall. If I hit Soul with a command heavy slash, I can bounce him off the wall. You can get additional damage this way. I can even just kind of do a raw hit, and you can see that eventually I would send them through. How you send them through is by splatting them onto the wall, which is done by just kind of hitting them against the wall repeatedly. So like you can see that if I hit Soul off of the wall, a little glyph pops up, and so it's just kind of adding this build up. So if I keep hitting them up against the wall, they splat, and then I send them through. So we'll go ahead and do this one more time. The splat, the send through, does a chunk of damage, and then I also get the positive bonus that we talked about during the meter portion of the guide. Now, there is a slight nuance to knocking someone through the wall. If you do it normally, like I just did, you'll notice that the positioning of the characters is different. So if I use Vapor Thrust, Soul gets up almost immediately. However, if I use my Overdrive, they go right through, and Soul spends some time on the ground, and it allows me to approach. So if you use an Overdrive to go through, you can advance and continue your assault. Now, before we conclude, I want to go over 2 frequently asked questions that brand new fighting game players usually have, because when I started, I had very little guidance or idea of what it was like to be proficient at fighting games, so hopefully it helps clear things up. These 2 questions are, what character should I use for learning, and what controller should I use when playing? Starting with the character question, I cannot stress enough that if any character on the roster looks even remotely cool to you, pick that character. I'm a big advocate for playing who you want. Who cares if it's easy or difficult as long as you're having fun, right? The way I look at it is, if you spend your time playing a character that is easy, which is probably a character you don't want to play, and every time you lose, it's gonna feel even worse. Like, oh, this character is supposed to be easy, I should be winning, but I'm not. Losing is inevitable, so you might as well have fun up until that point that you're kicking everyone's butt. Additionally, if you're playing someone you don't want to play, you learn the basics and then swap to a brand new character, you're still going to need to learn that character too, which in my opinion, the act of doubling back to learn a character isn't worth the mental strain of playing someone you're not totally invested in to begin with. So ultimately, play and learn how you want. If you have zero idea who to play, no one interests you, the characters demonstrated in this guide, Soul and Kai, are great characters that are easy to wrap your head around. As for the controller question, and I was someone who also went through a controller crisis, and I pretty much do every single time I pick up a new fighting game. I have this phase in a new fighting game where I'm kind of just feeling out the controller and what's comfortable and what's good to play on. I have a DualShock controller, I have a stick, I have a Hori Fighting Commander, and I also have a hitbox. And I can confidently tell you that the way the buttons can be rebound and Strive, there isn't a lick of difference between all of these controllers when playing. You can perform every action accurately and relatively easily depending on your skill level. The only exception is maybe charge motions. I'm not a big charge character player, so I haven't really had the experience of playing those characters. So it's going to be a lot harder for me in general. Maybe you play a lot of charge characters, so I'm not the best judge for that. But for everything else, like Roman cancels, bursts, running, etc., every controller is viable. So play what is comfortable, play what is affordable, and just remember to get comfy with your own personal button layout. But that's gonna do it for this guide. This is a super long video. I haven't made a video this long in a very long time. I want to thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know if this video helped you. Leave a like on it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Guilty Gear Strive content. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out. Have a good one.